Hello, welcome to Show and Tell Meg. I'm Megan, and I like to make things and tell people everything about them and get them excited about it too. So I decided my most recent finished object is the Mohn cardigan, which if you are a fan of knitting and watching YouTube, which I imagine you are if you're watching this video, you might have heard of it. This sweater was recently released by Engineering Knits, and it is a replica of a vintage cardigan that she purchased that was handmade, but she created her own pattern off of an existing garment and then graded it out. It's her first pattern, and I've really enjoyed watching her channel for a really long time. She's exactly in my wheelhouse of things that I like to do and learn about. And so when she came out with this pattern, I thought, why not? It's a very cute sweater, and I'm a pretty experienced knitter. I like vintage style, so why not make it? I got the pattern pretty much right after it was released. I didn't have an active plan on making it immediately, but I was really curious about how this textured stitch is made. And so I wanted to see if I had yarn that was going to work for it, because she gives quite a few options with gauge. And so this all started because I pulled out some random yarn from my stash that I got on Black Friday, and I wanted to see if it would work. And it did work. And here we are a month later after I started it. I have a completed sweater, which for a sport weight sweater, that's pretty crazy to me. So what do I even say about it? I don't know. Let's see. I have notes. So like all projects with me, as far as knitting a sweater, this started with swatching. I know swatching is one of those topics that people were like, I don't need to swatch. I've been knitting for 12 years. I've been knitting sweaters most of that time. And personally, sweaters take me a long time, and I would rather put in the time at the beginning to find out if I'm knitting the right size. And so I was really glad that I did it with this one, especially because she gives such a range of gauge. She gives the options of Knit Picks Swish DK and Knit Picks Palette Held Double. I've watched her talk about these yarns and this sweater quite a bit in her videos, and she recommends a sport weight, which for the time that this was made, that actually makes a lot of sense. If you're into vintage knitting, sport weight was pretty common. Most everything is like fingering and sport weight. And I happened to have some sport weight yarn, which for me, this is a little odd. This is actually my first sport weight sweater I've ever knit, and I've knit 33 sweaters now in 12 years. So I grabbed this because it was in the sale at Knit Picks for Black Friday. They had a day where certain yarns were $2, $4, or $6, and these were $2 a piece. So for sport weight yarn that has any wool content whatsoever, to me, it was a very good deal. So this is Knit Picks Upcycle Alpaca Blend. The way that I understand it is this is they're cleaning out the factory floor, they sweep it all up and upcycle it into yarn. And they made it in sport weight and in worsted weight, and they had different colors in each. This one is 273 yards to a 100 gram ball, and it is 33% alpaca, 34% wool, and 33% acrylic, which normally I try to stay away from on things I'm going to wear, but I figured for $2, it was worth a shot. So not only did I want to make this pattern, I also really wanted to try this yarn. So here we are. I knitted a swatch, and I actually knitted it twice. I like to knit swatches while I watch movies. I was watching Charade, and I knitted my first one, and it just wasn't looking right. The whole cool thing about this sweater, if you can see that, is the texture. I'm trying to like get it from a side. You get this kind of bobbly looking texture to these circles, And they're not actually bobbles. It's achieved with a tuck stitch. And so from the back, it looks like this. And the first time I did my swatch, everything was just kind of laying flat. And it just looked like circles, which was fine, but it wasn't what I was going for. So I pulled the whole thing out and I did it again. And I'm really glad that I did, because I managed to figure out something that she didn't mention. She gives a link in the pattern to a video tutorial on how to do the tuck stitch, which is awesome. And when I watched that, I was like, oh, okay. And at first I started doing it and everything went fine, but then I would do it the next time and it was laying flat again. And so I have taken a video of how I had to get this right in my brain to try to help if anybody else has a struggle with making this tuck stitch. Maybe it was just me. I just couldn't get it, and because of how I knit, it just wasn't working. So here is that video. So I wanted to show the thing that took me longer to realize than I am proud to say when I was first knitting the tuck stitch for this, which Engineering Knits has a great tutorial that comes with the pattern, but I still had to do the swatch twice before this clicked. So when you are on the tuck stitch row, my problem was my yarn is very sticky. And so when I drop the stitch, it doesn't want to pull. I would have to pull it myself. And the trick with that was to then make sure that I went behind all 4 of the rows to knit the tuck part. So I'll do it again. So what I had to do was come down to the stitch below, drop off, and then physically pull them apart with my fingers, and then make sure I put the needle back under all 4 to do the tuck. And then you get the bubbling. So I figured someone else could benefit from that and not have to knit 2 swatches like I did. Okay, so I took the sweater off so that I could show you when I really figured out my mistake. So you knit this from the bottom up, and as you can see, this is the inside. You have all these lovely tuck stitches inside, makes a very cool texture even on the inside. But if you look at my first row, see if you can see that. See how it looks like it's not tucked. It's really loosey-goosey, you know? This is what happens if you don't do what I just showed you in that small clip. And because it was only 1 row, I didn't bother to rip back. But if you look closely, you can see they just kind of look like squares. They don't look as circular and definitely not bobbly like the others. So thankfully, since it's just the 1 row, I think it doesn't throw off. Like, nobody would know this unless I show them. And the rest of the sweater, as you can see, I tucked it correctly. When I was swatching, I did have one that I messed up, and I didn't even realize it until I was done with the swatch. So, you know, here and there is one thing, but it all worked out in the end. As far as this sweater goes, this sweater was so fun to knit. I said it already once, but I can't believe I finished a sport weight sweater in a couple days shy of a month. I am not a slow knitter, but I'm not a particularly fast knitter, and mostly I don't have a ton of knitting time. So when I do anything smaller than a worsted weight, it takes me a few months at least. Grant you, I've never done sport weight before, so maybe some of it had to do with that, but I don't see sport weight being that big of a difference from fingering weight, and typically fingering weight sweaters take me months. So the fact that this got done in a month, I mean, it was very potato chippy, as they say. Like, you just want to keep getting through the next color row. And when you're doing, you know, from the bottom up, that makes it go really quickly. You knit this from the bottom up as one, then you split and hold the fronts, you know, you hold the You do this section of the front, then you do the back, then you do the other section of the front, and then you sew those all together so you essentially have a vest. And then her instructions have you then knit the sleeves, then do the button band and the collar. Over the years, because I tend to always use stash yarn and I am always playing yarn chicken, I have learned to knit the main body of the sweater first, get it to the length that I want, then knit the button band and collar, neckband, whatever it is that it has, then do the sleeves just so that I can make sure I have enough yarn. That wasn't a problem with this project. I didn't actually have to do that, but I really wanted to see how everything was fitting. And I mean, yeah, you can try it on without the button band, but I feel it's just so much more of a realistic representation of how it's going to fit you. And so I just wanted to get it to that point. So I made a vest essentially, and then did the button bands, which are knitted in a really interesting way. And this was another slightly harder part for me of this pattern. The pattern really does really well at holding your hand to an extent on a lot of the making of it, but then you get to the button band and it just says cast on this many stitches with an Italian bind off, or an Italian cast on, and knit this. I had never even heard of an Italian cast on, and I've been knitting for 12 years. So I'm looking up videos on an Italian cast on, and all the ones I was finding were to like start from scratch with an Italian cast on, but that's not what we were doing. And so it did not compute. It took quite a bit of trial and error. And then I finally thought to look up a video of doing an Italian cast on for a button band. And then I found videos that actually showed me. So if you are looking, I feel like it would have been really helpful to have that mentioned in the pattern. Very small critique. Obviously, I found the information, but if you weren't a very experienced knitter, it would have probably been harder. So anyway, I did that. It was very cool though. You don't have to sew on a button band, which I've also done. Typically, vintage patterns have you sew it on. That just really sucks. It is just the most tedious thing ever. This one, it gives you a knit purl rib texture that goes vertical with the sweater, which is typical to vintage sweaters, which I like. It makes it very stretchy out-y though. And so I did my favorite thing, which was to line the button bands. Before I get to that though, I guess I should mention the sizing. So she gives really good instructions on the size. She shows that hers has, I believe, 2 inches of positive ease. It's designed to be worn with 0 to 2 inches of positive ease. And so she gives suggestions as, you know, if you have this big of a bust, you should size up. I did the opposite. So I have a 40-inch bust, and in this kind of style, I like a fitted sweater. This sweater does not taper down for the waist. I like to have a shape to my waist. Otherwise, I feel like it just makes me look thicker. And that's just personal preference. If you want that, that's absolutely fine. I think it looks adorable on her. It just wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I feel most comfortable wearing. So knowing, you know, knitting stretches, I sized down. I knit the size 38. I got gauged perfectly with this yarn. And that way it's not, you know, I have 40-inch bust and a 36-inch waist. So it wasn't exactly on my waist, but it's tighter. And so I feel like it gives a little more of that cinched in kind of silhouette that I try. I try to accentuate the narrowest part of me. To each their own, but that worked really well for me. And then the other consideration with the button bands in particular, because I like a more fitted sweater, I don't like my sweaters to look tight. Personally, I feel, you know, other than it being so tight that your stitches stretch out, like you never want that, but I like it to be fitted. So I tend to go for 0 ease, and I just don't like to have my button bands pull because the rest of it is fitted. Like when you have something that's that fitted, it's going to compensate somewhere. And usually that's at the buttons. The buttons only have this one little bit that's holding it on you. And so over the years, I have just learned to back my button bands. I use Petersham ribbon. This is rayon Petersham. Years ago, I really liked By Gum by Golly. I still like her now. She goes by a different name. But her blog, she had a very detailed tutorial. And this was a really common vintage technique, apparently, was to back your button bands, but also just to use ribbon as a button band in general with nothing on top of it. But I like to back it. Because I sew, it's not a big deal. It's a little bit of a hassle, but essentially you make your button band on the knitting and then you lay out a piece of ribbon, mark where your buttonholes need to go. I machine stitch them on my button band and then I hand sew that all down. And then I don't have to do buttonholes, but I also stabilize the button side. And it just adds a stability. Like it makes it where I say you don't look like you're hulking out of your sweater. It doesn't look like your button bands are having too much strain on them and trying to pop undone. So it just gives a smoother appearance on the outside. The irony is I don't typically wear my cardigans buttoned like out in daily life. In photos for my blog, I always do, but I like the option. I like that it's well made. It also encloses everything really well. So I carried my strands of yarn from color to color. And so you had a pretty decent strand. I did catch them on the edges, but you still had, an inch or so of loose yarn. And that's not a huge deal. But if I'm enclosing the button band anyway, why not tuck those underneath and hide them? And so that's exactly what I did. I just pushed those floats under here and then caught the yarn around it on that, sort of seam there. And it worked perfectly. And I really like how clean the inside of this turned out. I think it looks very fancy. Another slight regret that I have, and this is completely just a regret on my part. This isn't anything fault of the pattern. But the night that I was like, okay, I'm going to finish these button bands. It was Saturday night and I wanted to be able to wear it the next day. I went through my button stash and I immediately found this tube of these grayish buttons. I have a whole tube of them. They were like a garment industry clearance thing I got from my favorite sewing store. And they were great style and color match for the gray that I used here. And so I just grabbed this size and did it. And I, literally did the button bands and everything. I get it on. I start sewing these buttons on. And I had two different sizes of these buttons. I had this size and I had a slightly bigger one. And as soon as I was sewing these on, I was like, this probably would have looked better with the bigger size. But these were a pretty snug little fit for the holes that were there. And so I just, these fit, they're the right color, they match, we're going for it. And so I kind of wish that I would have tried the bigger ones before I went through all the effort. Like you're talking, I don't know, an hour and a half-ish, 2 hours, something like that to do the button bands like this. So I kind of wish that I had tried the other option before I went through all this effort. But in the end, I still like it. I think they're cute. No, wrong side. And they don't take away, could they be a little bigger? It might make it a little cuter. Yes. But I still like how it came out. Actually, I just realized I didn't mention what color yarn I picked. So the upcycled alpaca blend, my base color is called Sapphire. And the sweater used almost 3 skeins of that. This is what I had left of the final skein. And then the other 2 colors I used are Black Pearl and Arctic. And those didn't even use a half a skein. So 273 yards. I mean, this is a very small quantity. I was expecting it to use a lot more. I mean, her pattern does say that it only takes 1 skein of each, but I was expecting to have more gone than this. So this is honestly a pretty good stash busting project in my opinion. I mean, it took maybe 4 skeins of sport weight yarn. That's pretty good. Another user error issue I ran into was with the sleeves. I still don't exactly understand how this happened, but if you look, this sleeve is not as puffy as this sleeve. I wasn't going for puffy sleeves. Like the example sweater doesn't have puffy sleeves. It's more of a 50s, 60s style than a 40s style. 40s would have had puffy sleeves, I feel like. And so this was designed to be smooth here, but the first sleeve that I knit, I was just going, this just isn't cinching down as much. And so when I knit the second sleeve, it came way narrower. So this is definitely something I messed up somewhere along the way. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. In the end, it's the glory of a seamed garment. You won't know this, but there's more seam allowance tucked underneath this. And I just tried to steam, when I blocked this, I tried to press this down as much as possible. And I mean, I still have a little bit of a puff. It's not that big a deal to me. And I know as a knitter who I pretty much always focused on top-down seamless sweaters, big fan of Andy Satterlund patterns, if anyone has been around in the knitting world for the last like 10 years or so. And so seaming in sleeves kind of intimidates me, to be perfectly honest, even though I've made so many sweaters. I've only had to seam in sleeves, I don't know, 3 times. And every time I feel like I'm having to look it up, you know, just for moral support. Not that I don't know how to sew the seams. And this one went really well. Oh, the other thing, I kind of wish there was a little more guidance in the pattern about figuring out how to line up this. I saw that hers was that way. I really like those kinds of details on hand knitted stuff. And so I had to extend the length. I have a really long torso. And so I kept having to count on her. Like she tells you how many repeats are up the whole thing. And so I was trying to go by hers. I extended mine by 2 of the dot pattern, just to get to my natural waist. And so I still went by how she did it. I had to fudge things a bit up here, but I was nervous the whole time. Like I was afraid because the sleeves are also knit from the bottom up. And I was afraid I was going to get to the top and it wasn't going to line up. So I do wish there was a little bit more guidance for that, because it really does, it makes a huge difference. You don't notice it necessarily as a knitter on a sweater like this, but you would notice it if these didn't line up. You know what I mean? So that was my other only slight, like maybe I could mention something about that. But I think it turned out really, really nicely. I also really love this jaunty little collar. When you read the directions, or at least when I read them, I was like, that's too short. That's not going to be this collar, but here we are. And I think it's really cute. My hair covers it most of the time. That's why I have it pulled back. But usually when I wear it, you know, you don't really see it. I know it's there though, and I really like it. So I thought that was a very fun detail. So in general, I think this is a really great sweater pattern. I had a lot of fun making this. I love the opportunity for colors that you can make with this. I actually have a lot of this yarn because I got it for so cheap. And so I was really deliberating another color combination where it would have been like a dark plummy purple base with some pinkish, you know, muted mauve kind of tones. Who knows? I still may make that, because even though they're the same pattern, you can do different colors and you can end up with a totally different kind of look. I liked hers example one that she did where it gradated in like fall tones. I've seen some of the testers do different like color stripes where everything is different. I went with this because I figured it would go with more of the things in my wardrobe. I could wear it a little more, but I think it's a good stash busting project. And so with how well this went, I'm excited to see what other kind of patterns she comes up with. You know, I'm always a little hesitant with a brand new knitwear designer because you just never know. But I think that she really did it right. She did a lot of test knitting and tech editing. She showed all that process in her videos. And I think it went really well. I'm one of the first people to finish this sweater who wasn't a tester. And so this is completely my unbiased opinion. I was not given this pattern. I just really enjoyed it. And if you're at all inclined, if you like this style of sweater, I definitely recommend giving it a try because it was really fun to make. And I have a cute vintage style sweater in the end, which how can that be a bad thing? So thank you so much for watching this. I hope that this review was helpful. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe or give me a like, and I will show more things that I make in the future. And I'm excited to talk to you again. If you have any kind of questions about this, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment, and I will try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. I hope that you have fun knitting, and I will see you next time. Bye.